Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Professor Ming's Strategic Insights. Last week, we briefly talked about Mr. Trump's landslide victory in the election and the possible challenges he may face and the possible policy choices he may have. We all know that after returning to the White House that he'll be facing a very complicated international environment. He'll be facing the war in Ukraine and the wars in the Middle East and the challenges posed by the Communist China, especially surrounding Taiwan, especially in the Taiwan Strait area. Then people in the world will ask a question. As the most powerful country in the world, what kind of grand national strategy does the United States have? So the question is, what is the grand national strategy or national grand strategy? To put it very simply, it is the country's basic attitude toward the current international order. Are you pro or con? Do you support it? Do you safeguard it? Or do you challenge it? Or do you want to overthrow it? And then using this attitude or this position as the criteria to identify your friends and your foes. Those who are on the same side, suppose you support the current international order or current world order. Those on the same side with you are your friends. Those on the other side will be your friends or your opponents. It's that simple. Now the question is, in case that you identify more than one enemy, then what are you going to do with them? How are you going to sort them? How are you going to order them in terms of the degree of threat they pose to you? After the ordering is done, then you know who's the major enemy is and who's the secondary and the third and so on and so forth. How are you going to design a grand strategy toward these enemies? Naturally, as the most powerful country in the world, the United States will support and safeguard the current world order. Using this criteria, namely the attitude or the position toward the current world order to identify your enemy or your foes. And doubtlessly, Communist China is the United States' main or primary opponent or even enemy. In fact, more than one European politicians have pointed out, looking back, it was a major strategic mistake to allow the Communist China to enter into WTO, the World Trade Organization, because it uses massive national subsidies and it sets up imports barriers and it forces foreign companies to render their technologies or techniques in exchange for China's market. And then they dump its goods or products around the world at very, very low prices and causing cutthroat competition or what we call the destructive competition, thereby to sabotage the market mechanism around the world. Therefore, for the past 40 years, we have seen that mainland China has gradually developed its economy and then to a very powerful degree, and then it increases its national capabilities to the point that they can build up its army, its military at a very fast and very massive rate. And then they use their military to bully their neighbors, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and India, and so on and so forth. And then they conducted what we call the wolf warrior policy, and eventually to challenge the world order as we see it now. It was in 2017, after having formed a clearer vision of Communist China's ambition and conspiracy, Trump, we can say he single-handedly altered United States policy toward mainland China or toward Communist China, from a favorable one to a basically competitive one, and thereby somewhat swung back the imbalanced scale. In 2021, when Joe Biden took office, he basically continued Trump's policy toward mainland China, although the approaches may be slightly different, but the policy directions are basically the same. Now that Trump is going to be in charge of the White House again, so the question pops up again. What kind of grand strategy he's going to use toward mainland China or toward Communist China? I said this in my self-introduction at the very beginning of the program. I said I've been teaching courses in college, and one of the courses I taught was a was called theories of IR, or theories of international relations. And in the classroom, I always like to challenge my students by asking them a question. Now we're in Taiwan. We're facing a very powerful enemy, Communist China, in front of us. What choices do we have when facing an enemy like this, such a strong and a dangerous enemy like this? Well, some people say, well, some students may argue, well, we could fight until we're conquered or what. At least we have to try it. And some say, well, I want to surrender. I don't want to fight. Yeah, that's right. These are the two possible options or two possible strategies that we can use. But actually, theoretically speaking, now let me try to theorize it. Theoretically speaking, when you're facing such a powerful enemy or powerful opponent, there are basically 5 possible options or 5 possible national grand strategies for you to choose. The first one is capitulation, to surrender. You may think it's ridiculous, but some people do choose that. Well, remember in the 1970s and 80s when the Cold War was at its height, there were more than one European politicians, I remember very vividly, when facing the threat from the Soviet Union, they said, I'd rather be red than dead. That's exactly what they say. So capitulation or to surrender is not out of your imagination. But of course, Trump will not choose that. The second one is the response from one of my students, of course, is go to war. Just like World War I and World War II, when you're facing Germany, such a powerful enemy, you have to go to war and to fight against it. But today we're talking about the nuclear weapons. Most of the big nations or major powers in the world now possess nuclear arsenal, a very powerful nuclear arsenal. So a nuclear warfare is unacceptable and it's less likely. Although limited warfare may be possible, but people are worried about escalation. They worry about the possibility of escalating into nuclear warfare between two powerful nations should they start a conventional warfare between them. So that's the second choice. The third choice is peaceful coexistence. Well, you lead your life and I'll lead mine. Let's not disturb each other and we'll live in peace. There'll be no antagonism, no rivalry, and no nothing. So just peaceful coexistence. The question is it possible? Or does your enemy or does your opponent allow you to have that kind of leisure? Is it possible at all? And that's the third option, or third strategy. The fourth one is containment, the containment policy, as adopted by basically the United States, starting in the 1950s and then all the way into the 60s, 70s, and then into the 80s against the Soviet Union. It was, in terms of the final result or the consequence, well, the Soviet Union collapsed. But it's basically a very passive strategy. It may be effective. It depends on the situation, but it's been used before. The last one is what we call the peaceful evolution or peaceful revolution. It's much more active. Namely, you try to do whatever you can, short of a hot war, a war resorting to a military. You use all kinds of measures to urge, to promote a regime change on the part of your opponent or of your enemy, like I said, without going to war. So these are the 5 possible grand strategies one can use against your powerful enemy. President Trump has said it in public. He has great admiration for the late President Ronald Reagan. And let's use him as an example for comparison. It is generally recognized that Reagan's biggest contribution to world politics is that he paved the way for the disintegration of the Soviet Union and to the Eastern European communist countries, the communist regimes, and then put an end to the Cold War, Cold War 1.0, as we say it now. We have to remember when Reagan was in power, he was facing a very, very powerful Soviet Union. Soviet Union then had a nuclear arsenal comparable to that of the United States. It had a navy slightly superior to that of the United States, and it adopted a expansionist policy. It interfered in all kinds of wars here and there all around the world, especially in the Middle East. And in late 1978, he started a war in Afghanistan. He invaded Afghanistan with massive power. And President Reagan, when he was in power, he adopted a very active peaceful revolution or peaceful evolution policy, as we call it. He tried to strengthen his alliances with the countries of the same mind and tried to reinforce the so-called containment, the wall or whatever. Then he started a new army building or military building project, which was strongly opposed by President Carter, and that was criticized by Reagan during the presidential election debates. Among the army building or the military building projects, the most notable one or most successful one is a project with the nickname of a Star War. Reagan claimed that the United States had developed and almost to the perfection the laser weapons. United States could put laser weapon on the ground and somewhere in the air and then in the sky. Equip the satellites with laser weapons so that to form a shield, a very powerful shield against any incoming Soviet missiles, even armed with nuclear warheads. Reagan was a very good actor, although he wasn't very good in Hollywood, as he himself admitted in public. Anyway, but he was very good in the White House this time. And the Soviet Union took the bait. The Soviet leaders took the bait. So they plunged into this arms races and spent a huge sum of money, and then eventually brought their state finance to collapse. And that brought down the Soviet Union, and also that caused the disintegration of the communist bloc in Eastern Europe. And I'm sure you still remember, on June the 12th, 1987, Reagan was delivering a speech in front of the Berlin Wall. At the end of the speech, President Reagan called upon Gorbachev, then the Soviet leader at the time. He said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down the wall." And that's exactly what he said. And that was the headline of the news of the night and the second day. Now let's return to the question we raised earlier. Confronting the challenges posed by the communist China, what kind of grand strategy does Mr. Trump have? He had weakened China's economy by forcing manufacturing or manufacturing industry to leave China, basically owned by international companies. He had done a pretty good job, although there's a lot more to be done today. And secondly, he did block the flow of high technology into China, including products and talents, money or capital, and most importantly, chips. Well, he did not really start a new arms race, but he did work on the project of building up the military again. And whether he will do more on this aspect, it remains to be observed. So far that we can only be sure that Trump has said that he's going to raise the tariff again. He's going to impose a higher rate of tariff on Chinese products or Chinese goods. Well, we have to ask what kind of a goal he has about this tariff as a weapon or tariff as a policy, whatever you call it. Is it just for the reduction of trade deficit, or there's more to it? Does he want to go as far as to further weaken China's manufacturing industries? Does he want to weaken China's productivity? Does he want to go as far as to weaken China's economy as a whole? Or does he want to go as far as to weaken China's financial capabilities and thereby to weaken their military capabilities and to reduce their chips or their leverage in diplomacy? The question is, how far would he go? So we're asking whether he wants to make a strategic determination, just like what President Ronald Reagan did against the Soviet Union. I want to bring down the system. I want to end the system. I want to put an end to communism. For Reagan, it was the Soviet Union and a communist bloc in Eastern Europe. And today, for Mr. Trump, for President Trump, the president-to-be, would he want to put an end, or would he be determined to put an end to communism in China, and perhaps even to North Korea, Cuba, and Vietnam, and some other communist countries? It's yet to be seen, to be observed. But that's the question we want to raise, and that's the question we're deeply concerned with. I think that's what I want to share with you today. I hope you like today's program, and we'll see you next time.